Welcome to the Near Memo, a weekly conversation about search, social, and commerce. What happened, why it matters, and the implications for local. Happy New Year, everybody. Welcome to the Near Memo, the first episode of 2024. It's episode 140, remarkably, for the three of us, David, Mike, and Greg, where we talk about all things local and local search, SEO, the future of search, and so on and so forth. And today we're going to be talking about a lot of AI related issues and search, and also sort of Google's competitive position now in this sort of shifting market. So David's going to lead us off with a discussion of the status of SGE, which is on a lot of people's minds as Google kind of has passed its own deadline of, I guess, canning it or making it something more than an experiment, which they didn't do. So David, tell us what happened.
Sure. Well, that's about the extent of what the news item was. It's just that December 31st came and went, and there was no news. So that was, I guess, not really, in my mind, not really that much of a surprise. SGE has felt half-baked, if that, maybe quarter-baked, for most of its existence, and it hasn't necessarily felt like it was ready for prime time in my own searching experience. And then at the same time, the flip side of that is just I'm hard pressed to remember a theme, possibly universal search when it first came out back in 2008 or 9. But I'm hard pressed to think of a theme that's created as much sort of angst and general energy in the SEO community around its potential and the potential negative impacts primarily on search traffic. I just saw, not even going to give the guy a courtesy of someone posting on LinkedIn a Gartner prediction that search traffic was going to decline by 50% in the next 5 years. And there's all of these kinds of doom and gloom stories. And I guess I would say I think that might be true in certain verticals that are largely content oriented, where informational queries is the sort of bread and butter of their search traffic. But as we talked about at the tail end of 2023, the logical conclusion to a lot of these sort of more conversational or answers driven interfaces is ultimately a set of answers at the end that are transactional in nature. Like you can't just say, buy a widget to ChatGPT and have it show up at your door. You still have to actually buy it from a source, right? Or purchase a service or whatever. And so I guess I'm not as bearish on the ultimate, particularly as it relates to local businesses. I'm not as bearish on the ultimate impact of SGE. And at the same time, I'm also not as panicked as many SEOs seem to be about, oh my God, like this is SGE in its final form. Look how much traffic it's stealing. And we saw, I think, a sort of a bifurcation of 2024 predictions from a lot of people who were sort of panicking a little bit about like, hey, you got to prepare for SGE, what it's going to do to your brand, blah, blah, blah. And I think that the smarter advice at this point is still, let's wait and see. I really do not feel like SGE is anything close to its final form. And while I think it's great to experiment with the triggers that populate an SGE when it shows up by default, when it has to be instantiated by a user, the rankings of results, particularly as it relates to local businesses, like where are those coming from? I think that's all useful sort of research-oriented behavior, but I would not be basing any kind of search business strategy at this stage on what SGE has been to date, because I just don't think it's anywhere close to its final form, and I think it's actually too early to make a lot of predictions about the impact that it might have.
Well, nonetheless, people are doing that, saying that different estimates suggest between 20 and 50+% of certain kinds of websites' traffic will be consumed by SGE. I agree with you that I think a lot of it is in the sort of informational top of the funnel kind of query zone, and transactional queries, very specialized, very specific queries are not going to be as impacted. I was thinking the other day,
unless content is your business, it's unlikely that those informational queries, even if they're driving search traffic today, they're likely not driving revenue. So,
yeah, if you're a content publisher like a CNET that answers certain kinds of questions, how do I turn off my iPhone or whatever it is, then
Yep.
you're potentially really in danger. I think Wikipedia is also really vulnerable to SGE because that's where a lot of people will get certain kinds of basic information that SGE is targeting as well, which I think is a bad thing. I mean, I think Wikipedia is
Yep.
really an important resource for people, trustworthy, and so on and so forth. And I would hate
Well,
to
some of
see it
that behavior
suffer.
is already happening, though. When you have a query that requires a longer form answer, you go to Google, you look up something, let's say it's an actor, and if you really, they give you a lot of stuff already about an actor, but if you really want to understand, more about them, you do go through to Wikipedia. So, I mean,
Well, those are
you,
those are well, Mike. I know you want to know all about their childhood and where they grew up and that sort of thing. But but if you just want to know who was that actor that was in that movie that I
well,
remember, that then
more
that
likely what I'm doing is I'm looking up a historical mention in a fiction to see if it's real. And then I want to understand how that historical event impacted reality. Typically, Google's not going to answer that, right? I need to go to Wikipedia to get that answer. So that I think
Right.
you'll see some
But that's
segmentation.
that type of query is just not relevant to the most of the people hopefully listening to this podcast. I mean,
Probably not,
I
but you'll
agree
see
that those kinds of
segmentation of the
queries are
queries as well. I mean, Google is
right.
only ever going to give a summary and a bad one at that, or a mediocre one. And what's SGE going to do? Write a full page history? It's unlikely. I mean, I don't see Google taking that path. Do you? In other words, there'll be segmentation
Well,
of these informational queries as well.
Ben Thompson might disagree, Mike, where Google is going to be actually getting into the content creation business with some of
Well,
these
maybe.
AI
Yeah.
tools. So I would just
well,
say though, to me, SGE at this point feels like a sort of glorified featured snippet, and I actually think that you can basically swap out the impact on informational query traffic that the implementation of featured snippets had. I think it's going to be largely similar for SG. I don't see it actually taking a lot of sort of mid funnel or bottom of funnel traffic from brands and from small businesses and agencies serving them that are listening to this podcast.
just as an editorial aside before we move on to you, Mike. Periodically these articles appear. Oh, Google's results are shitty these days, and what happened? And those
And
are
we've
sort of
published half of them.
well, they continue to trickle out. They continue to trickle out. And Google takes the position. I think Danny Sullivan has advocated on behalf of this proposition that Google's results are better than ever, in fact. And it's blah blah blah. But anecdotally, my experience of Google continues to be that I'm having trouble finding things, or I'm finding really bizarre things. Like I tweeted about this. I was looking up, for some reason. I don't know what started me down this path, but I was looking at the health benefits of apple cider vinegar, right? And I'm always looking for kind of quack cures and that kind of thing. Anyway, so it's supposed to be good to drink apple cider vinegar for blood sugar and blood pressure and so on and so forth. And then I looked
It's
up
just
this
not good for your
question.
mental health is the problem with it.
It tastes bad. That's the primary problem.
That's right.
But you dilute it in water. So I was looking at, like, when is the best time of day to drink it, and I got all these articles from Indian publications in India. And I thought, well, they may be perfectly fine and credible and all that. I thought, why am I that's totally weird. They're certainly going to be US based or, European based. I've got nothing against the Times of India and other Indian publications, but there's going to be a bunch of Healthline, WebMD, whatever, Mayo Clinic. There's going to be a bunch of these articles about whether or not it's good for you in the first place and how frequently you should drink it, and none of those appeared. I mean, I was on my iPhone, and none of those appeared, at least in the first set and plus scrollable results. And I thought, what, this is really bizarre. What's going on here? And Lily Ray has been showcasing lots of examples of weird search results that are probably a byproduct of Google's so many updates that they did. So there's definitely something off about some of these results. It's just Google has become less and less useful. There is no other. I mean, you can use Bing, you can use DuckDuckGo, whatever. But really, as a practical matter, for certain kinds of queries, there really isn't an alternative to Google still, just in the same way that it hasn't emerged a viable alternative to Twitter yet. You're right. I mean, there's pent up demand for something else, but there isn't really anything to take its place so far.
Thanks for joining David, Mike, and Greg. To stay on top of the latest developments in local, subscribe to our newsletter at nearmedia.co. We'll see you next week.